Serious, teachers of Reddit, when have you met the parents of a student and suddenly understood their behavior? Here's a lighter one. I had a student who always left their homework at school, always left their report at school, always left letters at school. I assumed it was all accidental to avoid their parents knowing about school things. Then we had parents' evening, and I had a lovely conversation with their mum. Mum asked for a particular sheet of information and made notes on it. Then she got up and left, and I realized she left the sheet behind on the desk just like her child always did. This happens frequently. The most common are those students whose parents are terribly overprotective and offensive. These students are overwhelmingly likely to be either arrogant, lazy types used to being bailed out, or anxious, quiet things terrified of disappointing their parents. But one parent in particular sticks in my mind. He was a really soft-spoken, kind chap, and totally blind from birth. His daughter walked him up to my desk where we talked for ages. He was appreciative of my time and feedback about his child, and spoke very fondly of her. Then gently led him away to the next appointment, chatting away together. It made sense, because this student was simply delightful in class, enthusiastic, kind and deeply empathetic towards others. She had time for everyone. I couldn't help thinking I'd just seen a fantastic relationship between a parent and child that had just been productive in every way. It cheered me up no end. This reminds me of the story one teacher told about a younger kid who would occasionally make random noise in class. Then they found out that the child's mom was a blind single mother, and the kid just naturally had picked up the habit of making noise when occupied playing so that their mother would know exactly where they were and were safe. Heart-meltingly wholesome. I had this student who was so down on himself. His intuition for math was great, and he would understand everything in class, but then there was no follow-through. No effort on homework or anything. At parent-teacher conferences he had almost failed my class, but I let him do makeup work, and he just barely made it. I spoke to him in front of his father, and I said, "I think he can do better than this." The father looked at him and said, "I don't think he can. I think this is your best." I'm not supposed to contradict parents, but I said, "I think he will prove you wrong." I realized his father constantly shits on him, so he has no motivation. Kid ended up getting expelled shortly after for something unrelated. This was my stepdad my whole life. I was a straight A student until one day he said, "So what? You're still not going to be worth anything later in life. Thanks, Brian. You're still a cunt, only now you're a single cunt." I had an extremely self-absorbed and arrogant student. The only person in real life I've ever heard use the phrase, "Do you know who I am?" Apparently he had won some local sports contest, and he really wanted to impress this younger student. He harassed every girl in the school. The first conversation I had with his mother, she sniveled, "You do know this is a sports school, right? Not an academic school." Click. I'm on a parenting sub, and there was a question a little while ago from a mom who wanted to know if she should hold her 8th grader back another year. He was a honors student, but they were considering sending him to the private school for another year of 8th grade so he had a better chance of starting during his freshman year of high school. I live in the South, and one of my kids is an athlete, so I have seen my share of crazy sports parents, but that's a pretty clear message that academics aren't as important as sports. My kid is small for his age and would benefit from another year before high school, but he is a straight A student, and grades are way more important than any potential for an athletic career. One of my son's coaches starts off each season by telling them that they are students before they are athletes, and any bad reports from teachers will result in them being benched regardless of how good they are. He followed through too, even if it cost them some games. Parents chase the low chance of their child being a professional athlete. Even if they beat the odds and make it, what are they going to do for the rest of their life? The overwhelming majority of student athletes will spend more years out of sports than in sports. I had a student who was a low-level rebel. I taught an elective, but I'm sure he was put in my class because it seemed low effort at the time. He was sulky, had issues with authority, didn't turn in his homework, etc. I dealt with him the same way that I deal with all my kids. and we slowly started to develop some fragile rapport. At parent-teacher conferences, his mom brought him along. He looked trapped and defensive, and she looked irritated. By that point in the year, he was passing my class, so I started off by reviewing his grades and the events that were coming up in my class. She interrupted me near the end to say, yeah, but what is his behavior in class like? How badly is he behaving for you? Poor kid slides lower in his chair, and I can tell that his mom brought him along as an exercise in shaming her kid. I didn't feel like playing that game, so I brightly laid out every possible positive interaction I had with him during the year, the conversations he had with me about career aspirations, the times he showed up on time to class, whatever I could throw at her. She left still looking irritated, but her kid left looking a little better. Sure, there were things I wished he would improve on, but that's a conversation for me and him to work out, not something to pile on in an evening of lectures from other teachers. I've met a lot of parents of great kids, and it totally makes sense that their kid is great because they're super nice and polite and normal. But I know people are here for the horror stories. I taught kindergarten for the first part of my career. My last year in K, I had a girl who was possibly the brattiest child I ever met. She had no qualms telling me no when I'd ask her to do something totally reasonable, was mean and nasty to the other kids. Just a total nightmare. At Meet the Teacher night, she came with her mom, despite me asking parents to leave their children at home unless absolutely necessary, and was totally disruptive and noisy, and mom said nothing. Mom stuck around to ask me a question at the end, and her daughter was covering her mouth as she was trying to speak. The mother just eventually gave up trying to ask me anything. I was so shocked I didn't even know what to do. A kid I had the year before was another hot mess. I had a really small class that year, which never happens in an urban public school, and it was so great for their social development. Except this kid. He didn't want to learn his classmates' names and didn't want to play with them. Fair enough. But he would also interrupt them when it was their turn to talk because he wanted it to be his turn. Everything had to be about him or he'd throw a fit. He did no work and was well behind all of the other kids. I met with the parents about his progress, and they just laughed and shrugged. That's just his personality, he's the star. They also didn't make him do any of the extra work I sent him to help him catch up because he didn't feel like it. I was so happy to watch him walk out of my door on the last day of school. My ex's mother was exactly like your second example, and was utterly convinced he was the star of every single situation. I found out years later that his measured IQ was under 100, but she had trained him just like a seal to perform tricks. It was all surface skill. He has a shallow memorized knowledge of a few subjects, and so he could sound knowledgeable as long as he did all the talking. The minute someone else joined the conversation and tried to engage him, then the rage would quickly surface. Even worse, he could strum a guitar and she had convinced him he could sing. Trouble was he imitated her, so he always tried to sing too high and it was awful. He was absolutely certain he was an undiscovered actor singer, so anytime there was a group he'd try to perform one way or another. Of course people were polite, but the comments behind his back were pretty harsh and he rarely stayed in one social circle for long. Textbook way to nurture a true narcissist. There's a boy in my class who hits children and laughs about it, most often with small disturbing smile as the other kid freaks out. We've told his parent repeatedly, and she stands there with her arms crossed looking at us like we should go die. Then she smiles at her son and asks in an overly cheerful voice if he wants to get ice cream, go to the movies, play mini golf, essentially rewarding him for this behavior. It's so fucking infuriating. But it makes sense, because it's right there. I was fired from my job as an aftercare worker for kids around 5 years old for telling the mother this exact thing about her daughter. The mother could not care less, and took her demon spawn to see Santa. The daughter would take her hairpins off her head, and try to stab other children in the eyes with them, all while laughing. But fuck me, right? Just trying to make sure she didn't send anyone to the hospital.